Hello, welcome, I hope your coffee is warm, and today we are looking at a deck tag of Ojer Axonil, the Deepest Might. This is an interesting commander that is a god of the deep that was born from the sun, has a dino for a hand and has a burning ancient weapon that he uses to defeat his enemies. He is the god of warriors, and he has once called forth 1,000 warriors to defeat the bad god, and he took his eyes out himself because the bad god had used his nephew, I think, as skin to sort of pretend to be another god so that he could war with the other gods because he just wanted to fight. And Ojer Axonil is definitely in for a fight. This is a commander that I told you about in my aggro commanders video, because I think this is one of the most fun ways to play aggro and one of the most effective ones. And it is in mono red, and mono red is really interesting because it doesn't feel like it should be in commander. But let's talk about the things that are in this deck. First of all, in any deck you will need board wipes. And this deck is a little bit weird because Ojer Axonil says that if a red source you control would deal an amount of non-combat damage less than Ojer Axonil's power to an opponent, that source deals damage equal to Ojer Axonil's power instead. So many things need to happen here. First of all, you need to have a red source. Second of all, you need to deal non-combat damage, so no combat damage will work. It will need to be damage less than Ojer Axonil's power, and then this you also need to deal damage to an opponent. So this won't work against other creatures, but I still put in board wipes like End of Festivities, which will deal 1 damage to each creature they control, because it is sort of a board wipe against some things, at least. But I think really we went a bit weak on the amount of board wipes here. Blasphemous Act really is one. I would say Vandal Blast is one, but only works against artifacts. And then Earthquake, of course, can be used as a board wipe too, but you need to pay enough mana. Tectonic Hazard and End of Festivities are mostly here for the burn, but I think we need less board wipes because many of the spells that we use to deal damage will also be able to use against creatures. So I think it sort of works. For draw, you can already see we have some game changers in here, and I think it is warranted because playing aggro is a little bit hard, and the game changers that are in this deck mostly are about drawing cards, maybe getting some mana, and red is the worst at both. But starting with Playful Shove, this deals 1 damage to any target. Of course you can again use this against creatures, and then you can draw a card. Of course doing double duty, replacing itself, and then hopefully you're using this to deal damage to an opponent, so instead you will deal 4 damage to your opponent. Count on Luck is card draw as well, or at least this is advantage, while Playful Shove just replaces itself. Count on Luck is 3 mana for an enchantment that will give you a card back every turn, but it says it in a way where you at the beginning of your upkeep will exile the top card of your library and you may play it this turn. So it is temporary draw, but still draw nonetheless, I would say. Same with Light Up the Stage, 3 mana to exile the top 2 cards of your library. Until the end of your next turn you may play them. Then Hazard's Monument will just cycle through cards, but still I would say sort of draw. It's not card advantage. It says whenever you cast a creature spell, you may discard a card and draw a card. And then red creature spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, so that is also very useful here. Even though we don't have the most creatures, but I made sure that there are enough in here. This is often a weakness for decks that are all about non-combat damage, that you won't have enough creatures to defend yourself with. So make sure in these decks that you have enough creatures. Even though it might just be to defend yourself. Past in Flames I think is really good, not really draw, but says each instant and sorcery card in your graveyard gains flashback, so you can use your instant and sorcery cards at least once more. I guess only once more. Then Valakut, I think. Exploration is a 3-mana enchantment that says whenever a land enters, you exile the top card and you may play it this turn. Or you may play it as long as it remains exiled, which is even better. And then at the beginning of your end step, if there are cards exiled with it, you put them into their owner's graveyard, and then it deals that much damage to each opponent. Meaning, if you have exiled one, you can then deal with Ojer Axonil out 4 damage to each of your opponents, and maybe even more, as we will soon see. Then Gamble, really good card. It's a 1-mana card that allows you to search your library for a card and put it into your hand, but then you do need to discard a card at random. So it can be a bit of a risk, but if you have enough cards in hand, of course that will be more fine, I hope. Ashling we will get to, but also draws cards. And then Artist Talent, again more of a cycler, but says whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you may discard a card and draw, but then also non-creature spells will be 1 less to cast if you get it to level 2, and at level 3, if a source you control would deal non-combat damage to an opponent or a permanent an opponent controls, it deals that much damage plus 2 instead. And why would you want this? Because this sort of works against your commander. So what happens if you deal 1 damage to an opponent? It gets plus 2 damage, so it will become 3, and then Ojer Axonil will just still make it into 4 damage. So it works less well with Artist Talent, right? Well, sometimes you want cards that do the same thing as your commander, and basically 3 damage and 4 damage is the same thing, I'm saying right here. You want it because you want multiple things that work as your commander, because even if Ojer Axonil dies and might return, we haven't even talked about that, but you still want ways to deal more damage. And I think this is actually a perfect moment to talk about it, because Ojer Axonil has another ability. When he dies, return it to the battlefield tapped and transformed under his owner's control. And what does that mean? Well, you get the Temple of Power. And the Temple of Power is a land that taps for red mana, and for 3 mana you can tap it to transform it back into Ojer Axonil. But you can only do this if red sources you control dealt 4 or more non-combat damage this turn and only as a sorcery. And many of the things that we have, many red sources that deal non-combat damage, will only deal 1 damage on their own. So we do need a few extra commanders, as I call them, that help you deal more damage. More on them later, but you can see why this is important, especially for Ojer Axonil. So I tried in this deck, while rebuilding it a bit after I built it for the first time, to put in more of them. And I would say every bit of room that you make for more cards should go into things that double damage or triple damage if you have the space. Last sort of card draw is Jeska's Will, which says exile the top 3 cards of your library and you may play them. Or you could choose to add a red mana for each card in target opponent's hand. Usually you will get 5 to 7 mana for this, so this is very strong already. But then you only choose 1, and if you control your commander, you may choose both, so that will be even more powerful. So it's legit that it is too powerful for most decks. It's also pretty expensive, and I wanted to talk about that too, because Ojer Axonil, while being very expensive as a card itself, because I think that is because it is in multiple types of decks, I think. Well, while that is expensive, you can build this as a very cheap deck, because you just need a bunch of things to deal damage to your opponents that are red, and there are many of those. So onto the extra commanders. We have Virtue of Courage, which can also deal 2 damage to any target as an instant first on its adventure side. And then from 5 mana you can play it as an enchantment, where it says whenever a source deals non-combat damage to an opponent, you may exile that many cards from the top of your library. This doesn't double the damage, but this does mean that you get to draw a bunch of cards. So I would say this is a sort of extra commander. Torbrand, the Thane of Red Fell, replaces Ojer Axonil in a way, because it again gives any red source 2 extra damage when it deals damage to an opponent. So that will also work for your creatures, which is nice. Artist Talent we talked about a bit before, but does also work against permanents opponent's control. And then Solvim, the Mayhem Dominus, is a 4 mana Phyrexian horror that says if a source you control will deal that non-combat damage, so also non-red sources sometimes, to an opponent or a permanent, so there's many things in one. It deals double the damage to that player or permanent instead. Now this could also have been the actual commander, so you could change them around, but this works less well in this deck because Ojer Axonil is just so special, because it works with 1 mana or 1 damage spells so well, and Solvim wants you to play cards that already deal a bunch of damage, not just 1 damage spells. I think that is really special about Ojer Axonil. For lands we have of course a bunch of mountains, but I went with some weirder things. So Forgotten Cave enters tapped, but can also be cycled for a red mana. That is fine usually in this deck because, well, you don't want things to enter tapped, but sometimes you just need to cycle your land for more damage. Spikefield Hazard, sort of a land, and I counted this as a land also because, well, we are red and we don't care about lands too much. We want to get to 4 or 5 maybe, and then we're fine. But also deals the damage if you choose to use the spell side. Spinerock Knoll, which will allow you to hide away 4, so you get to look at the top 4 cards of your library, exile it under the land, and then you get to play that card without paying its mana cost if an opponent was dealt 7 or more damage this turn. This will be very easy with 2 spells and Ojer Axonil out. Fire Nation Palace, a newer land that also says for 2 mana target creature gets Firebending 4, meaning they will get to add 4 red mana whenever they attack. Then Lint Bloom, which is a land but also an adventure first. Again a tapped land, so you don't want too many of these, but that's just 2 now. And before you use it as a land, you could also use it as an adventure first. And create a 0/1 wizard that says whenever you cast a non-creature spell, this token deals a damage to each opponent. So a bit of synergy, but this is a black token, so it won't work with Ojer Axonil, but could work, for example, with Solvim to double that damage. Still, you are using a bunch of non-creature spells, so it will still be good even if Ojer Axonil isn't out or doesn't work. Reliquary Tower is a card that also gives you no maximum hand size, and I really don't care about having a few colorless lands. Command Beacon, same thing, but also very good here, because it says sacrifice this land to put your commander into your hand from the command zone, meaning you just have to pay the 4 mana, not the extra cost. Valakut, again, I have to say it, the Molten Pinnacle, again tapped land, so that is becoming a drawback, and then also says whenever a mountain enters under your control, if you control at least 5 other mountains, you may have Valakut deal 3 damage to target creature or player, and then it will be upgraded with 1 extra damage with Axonil out, but still already good on its own, definitely with the amount of mountains that we have. And this one also enters tapped unless you control a mountain. Arena of Glory taps for a red mana, and then you can also tap it together with a mountain to exert it and add 2 mana. If the mana is spent on a creature, it gains haste, so that can also be very useful. Then we have some weird things, because power is very good with Ojer Axonil. Why? Because if a red source you control would deal an amount of non-combat damage less than Ojer Axonil's power to an opponent, it gets upgraded to the amount of power Ojer Axonil has. So more power means more damage. Livan, therefore, for example, says whenever you cast a non-creature spell, target creature gets extra power where X is that spell's mana value. This of course then is very good because you have a bunch of non-creature spells that you can cast to give Ojer Axonil a bunch of power. Let's say you play this with Blasphemous Act, for example. It will get a little bit crazy because the mana value of Blasphemous Act, of course, is very high, so you'll get an extra 9 damage on top of the 13 damage you are already doing to each creature. So that is, of course, one fun way. Does it work? Actually, it gets extra power. Yeah, and then it deals damage. Yeah, so that works. Yeah, sorry. Then we have Hero's Blade, 2 mana for an equipment, and it gives 3 extra power, so that will take any damage up to 7 damage. I took this one. There are multiple equipments that give an extra 3 power, but I use this one because it says whenever your commander, for example, will enter, you may attach this equipment to it immediately. So anytime you play your commander with this out, you already get it to 7 power. So use this in preparation for your commander entering, and you will already be ready to deal way too much damage to your opponents. Downhill Charge, I think isn't used too much. It's a 3 mana instant that says you may sacrifice a mountain as well to pay for this card's cost, and then target creature gets X power, where X is the number of mountains you control, and again you will have a bunch of those, but already if you have, for example, 4 mountains, 4 extra damage every time you play something is very good, and you won't have to pay mana for this. You just need to sacrifice 1 mountain, and you can already also tap it for mana, of course, before you sacrifice it. Blackblade Reforged is another 2 mana equipment, but this one is just very good because it says gets +1/+1 for each land you control. So also again sort of the same as with Downhill Charge, but this time on an equipment. You do need to pay 2 and then 3 mana to equip it to your commander. Unleash Fury and Bulk Up both double the power of target creature until end of turn. Let's say you already got it to 7, it will get to 14. Use the Bulk Up on it again and you will double the power again to be 28. And then you will just need to play 2 cards that deal damage to your opponents to win the game. Swiftfoot Boots is a bit different because it gives hexproof, but of course you need protection too, so Lightning Greaves is here for the same reason, and Commander's Blade actually as well, but this one also gives 3 extra power. Also will just be 3 mana to equip it to your commander instead of 5. Then we have some ramp, actually not too basic, which is weird for red. But we have the Mind Stone, which is pretty basic. You might know it. It gives a colorless mana. Hazardous Monument we sort of talked about because it gives red creature spells 1 less to cost. Defiler of Instinct we will talk about. Arcane Signet and Felwar Stone and Soul Ring, of course you will know. Chandra we will talk about later. The Fire Crystal I think is actually really good here. It's a 4 mana legendary artifact that says red spells you cast are 1 less to cast, so that is already very good. And then creatures you control will have haste, so that is also very good in an aggro deck. And then for 6 mana you can create a token that's a copy of a target creature you control. And there are many creatures that you would love to make it a copy of. So this is very good in aggressive decks, and we need to play it here. We have Electro, the Assaulting Battery, which gives red mana whenever you cast an instant or sorcery. Oftentimes you can combo off with one of these, but we have multiple here. We have, for example, Burgi, the God of Storytelling as well, which says whenever you cast a spell, add a red mana. And I think Aisling sort of does the same, but in a bit of a different way. So we have 3 ways to get an extra mana whenever we sort of play something. So that means that if we play a Tectonic Hazard, we will get 3 mana back for the 1 mana we spent. Also we have Ruby Medallion, which makes red spells easier to cast by 1 colorless mana. And that was it for the things we talk about here. Of course, Jessica's Will is here as well. Then we have sort of the things that work with non-creature spells to have some reach. We have Kindlespark Duo, which is a 3 mana version of this that deals 1 damage if you tap it to target opponent, and whenever you cast a non-creature spell you untap it. So all of these sort of do the same, but we have versions like Firebrand Archer, which is 2 mana to deal 1 damage immediately whenever you cast a non-creature spell, but won't be able to use it every turn with the tap ability. Unruly Catapult is the same because it deals 1 damage and then gets untapped. Guttersnipe is a bit different because it says whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, deal 2 to each opponent, meaning that you get to deal 4 to each opponent with your commander out. Fiery Inscription also gets the ring to tempt you, which is a bit different. Then is, I guess, a Guttersnipe. Coruscation Mage has Offspring, which makes it a bit different, and then deals 1 damage to each opponent, but we don't care about it being a bit less too much here. Same with Electrostatic Field. Then Longshot is very good. It says 4 mana for a legendary creature with reach and is a 3/3, and then non-creature spells will be 1 less to cast, so also sort of ramp, I guess, making your non-creatures cheaper. And then whenever you cast one of those non-creature spells, Longshot will also deal 2 damage to each opponent. So it is an upgraded Guttersnipe for 1 mana more, and it's very much greatly upgraded, I would say. And Ashling is a really long text box, but really good as well. 4 mana for creature that says you don't lose unspent red mana as steps and phases end, which can be very useful here, because the Magecraft ability says whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery, you discard a card and then draw a card. So that at least happens. If this is the second time, Ashling will deal 2 damage to each opponent, so then it becomes a 1-time Guttersnipe, and then and each creature they control as well, so that will also work. The thing is, the damage won't be upgraded by your commander, and then if it's the 3rd time this ability triggers, you add 4 mana. So it will also be an adder of mana. For at least the first 3 spells, it will give you 4 mana back. So basically good for the first 4 spells if you think about it. Then we have removal. We have some weird ones here again, because some of these just deal a bit of damage, but we'll talk about that more too. Pyrohemia is definitely great removal, deals 1 damage to each great creature and each player for 1 red mana after it is out. But at the end of turn, if no creatures are in play, you sacrifice Pyrohemia. Thing is, for 4 mana you play this enchantment, then you can at least deal 1 damage 3 times, and that means with your commander out that you will deal 4 damage 3 times, meaning 12. And if you can give your commander a bit more toughness too, that means that you can very easily win the game with this card. So very good. We have Grape Shot 2, which can also very easily win the game. It deals 1 damage to any target and then has the Storm ability. But more about this later. Fiery Confluence is also removal because it deals 1 damage to each creature and then 2 damage to each opponent as an option. You can also choose 3, by the way, so you can choose the same mode more than once, meaning you could go for dealing 1 damage to each creature 3 times. You can choose it 3 times. You could also choose deal 2 damage to each opponent 3 times. So you can definitely build your own monster with this card. Do note that I actually need to read up on this, but I put it in removal because you also get to destroy target artifact, so it is artifact removal at least. Chaos Warp is a bit more flexible as a removal spell because it just says the owner of target permanent shovels it into their library, so it's just gone, and then reveals the top card of their library to get it back if it's a permanent card. Earthquake we talked about in the board wipe section, but also just deals X damage to each creature. So you can choose the amount of damage here, which means you can choose which creatures are removed, which I think makes it a little bit of removal. Definitely isn't targeted removal though. Virtue of Courage deals 2 damage to any target. And then Chandra, we didn't talk about before, but says -3 deals 4 damage to target creature. You could also use it to add 2 red mana, or use it with the +1 to exile the top card of your library, and then you may immediately cast a card. But then, if you don't, Chandra will also deal 2 damage to each opponent, so it is again a Guttersnipe. Isn't everything a Guttersnipe if you think about it? Vandal Blast is a 1 mana artifact removal too, but could also be a board wipe for artifacts. We then go to the meat of the deck, which is the reach section. We have here Pyrrhemia again, deals damage to each player, to each player and more to your opponents. Spell Shock is a very interesting card here because it says whenever any player successfully casts a spell, Spell Shock deals 2 damage to him or her, meaning you will also kill yourself, but we don't care because we are an aggro deck. Your opponents will kill themselves faster because of your commander. Flame Jab deals 1 damage to target creature or player, but then you can also retrace it by discarding a land to play it again and again and again. Playful Shove we have talked about. Grape Shot we talked a little bit about. Deal 1 damage to any target, and then Storm, when you cast a spell, copy it for each spell before you cast this spell. And then you may choose new targets for the copies, so you can easily defeat an opponent with this. Flame Fusillade, I don't know. It's a 4 mana sorcery that gives all of your permanents the ability to tap to deal 1 damage to target creature or player, meaning that all of your creatures can then deal 4 damage to your opponents. Defiler of Instinct is a 4 mana creature from Phyrexia that says as an additional cost for red permanents, you may pay 2 life, so that the spell will be 1 red mana less. So you can, instead of 1 red mana, pay with 2 life for every spell. And many of your spells are very cheap, definitely with many of the cost reductions spells in this deck. So after this, many spells will be free, which is the best kind of spell. This effect reduces only the amount of red mana you pay, so it doesn't work with colorless versions of mana. Whenever you cast a red permanent spell, you also get to deal 1 damage to any target, which could also be an opponent, which is the best kind of damage. Harsh Mentor also deals damage to players, and says whenever an opponent activates an ability of an artifact, creature or land on the battlefield. So that is a lot of things that they could do to deal 2 damage to themselves. And this could be turned into 2, 7 or maybe 28 damage too. Tectonic Hazard is a 1 mana deal 1 damage to each opponent and each creature they control. So the opponent damage will be upgraded again. And the Festivities is the same thing, sort of. Says 1 damage to each permanent each opponent and each creature and planeswalker they control. So sort of each permanent, but you can deal damage to a random enchantment, I think. Mana Barbs is 4 mana to have an enchantment that says whenever a player taps a land for mana, the Mana Barbs will deal 1 damage to that player. Also deals damage to yourself. Again, we don't care about that too much. But if this gets upgraded to 4 damage each time, that is a bit strong. Urabrask, also very strong. Definitely sort of almost a commander here. Because it says whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, Urabrask deals 1 damage to target opponent and you add a red mana. So this is a sort of ramp. This is a sort of deal 1 damage to your target opponent every instant or sorcery. So it is again a Guttersnipe in a way. And then for 1 red mana you can exile it and then return it as the Great Work, which is a saga that deals 3 damage to target opponent and each creature they control. So this is more of a board wipe in that way, but just against 1 opponent. And then chapter 2 creates 3 treasure tokens, so ramping again, because I call treasure ramp. And then 3 says until end of turn you may cast instant and sorcery spells from any graveyard. If a spell cast this way would be put into a graveyard, exile it instead. So you can exile all of your opponent's graveyards of their instants and sorceries, but mostly we are interested in playing our own instants and sorceries again, because they work best with our deck. And then you return it again to have a great second commander in Urabrask. And Terror of the Peaks is definitely expensive because it's a dragon, but also very good here. Says spells your opponents cast that target a terror cost an additional 3 life, so ward, I think. And then whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, Terror of the Peaks deals damage equal to the creature's power to any target. Now, this will mean that you play your commander and deal 4 damage, which is the same as it would otherwise do. And many of your creatures still only deal still 4 damage, but that is a lot of damage, so this still works very well. And then Pyromancer's Goggles is in the other group, but just really good. It says add a red mana, and when it is spent to cast a red instant or sorcery, you may copy the spell. Of course, that works very well with big spells, but also works very well here because we make big spells out of our spells. Chandra's Incinerator is 6 mana for a card that costs less, where X is the amount of non-combat damage dealt to your opponents this turn. So almost always will just cost 1 mana. Trample, and whenever a source you control deals non-combat damage to an opponent, Chandra's Incinerator deals that much damage to target creature or planeswalker that player controls. So this means you can very easily deal 4 damage to creatures those players control as well, which is kind of our dream. Bolt Band, just very good to change the target of target spell or ability with a single target. Just a bit of defense as well. Same with Red Elemental Blast, which will counter target blue spell or destroy a blue permanent. And then Hexing Squelcher is a new one for 2 mana that says spells you control can't be countered, which is very good. And other creatures have Ward pay 2 life, or Ward pay 4 life, or Ward pay 28 life, if you are that good. Also, the spell can't be countered itself, and Ward pay 2 life on its own. So, very good card, just all around. Definitely if you go a bit higher powered. And that was it for this deck. So let me know what you think of the deck, if you think it's coherent or not. And I want to thank you for watching. Bye.